November 13th, 1942, 0148 hours, Iron Bottom Sound, Guadalcanal. The searchlight beam sliced through the tropical darkness as Captain Hara gripped the bridge rail of destroyer Amatsukaze, watching in horrified fascination as American shells exploded around his ship like a volcanic eruption of steel and fire. They are not aiming. They are simply filling the sky with metal. These words, scrawled hastily in his personal log that night, would capture a truth that defined the Pacific War's outcome before most Japanese officers even recognized it. In the next 35 seconds, USS San Francisco would fire more 5-inch shells than some Japanese destroyers carried for entire missions. The Americans weren't counting rounds. They were creating walls of fire that turned the night into artificial daylight, their gun barrels glowing red from continuous firing. 2,700 miles away in Pearl Harbor, ammunition ships were already loading the next shipment. 15,000 tons of shells, enough to replace everything the American fleet would expend in this battle 50 times over. In Tokyo, naval planners were calculating whether they could spare 12 rounds per gun for the next convoy run. The mathematics of defeat were being written in brass casings and cordite, in production statistics that mocked every assumption the Imperial Navy had made about fighting the United States. Captain Hara would survive to become the only Japanese destroyer commander to fight from Pearl Harbor to the surrender, witnessing a transformation that shattered not just ships, but the entire worldview of the Imperial Japanese Navy. The awakening had begun 6 months earlier, though few recognized it. On May 7, 1942, during the Battle of the Coral Sea, Commander Takeshi Naito, executive officer of carrier Shokaku, observed something that puzzled him deeply. American cruisers and destroyers had maintained anti-aircraft fire for 4 continuous hours, never seeming to pause or conserve ammunition. Each American destroyer, he would later testify to interrogators, appeared to carry more anti-aircraft ammunition than our entire destroyer division combined. The observation seemed impossible. Japanese doctrine, refined over decades, assumed that all naval powers faced similar ammunition constraints. The Type 96 25mm anti-aircraft gun, Japan's standard light AA weapon, came with strict firing protocols. Hold fire until aircraft reached 800 meters. Fire short bursts of 3 to 5 rounds. Cease fire immediately when the target passed optimal range. Not because this was tactically sound, but because ammunition reserves couldn't support any other approach. Lieutenant Commander Masatake Okumiya, aboard carrier Ryujo, had trained his gunners relentlessly on these principles. Each man knew that their ship's magazines held enough ammunition for exactly 12 minutes of sustained anti-aircraft fire. After that, they would be defenseless. The Americans, he observed with growing unease, seemed to fire continuously for hours. But the full implications wouldn't become clear until Guadalcanal, where the mathematics of industrial warfare would be written in blood and steel across the waters. The Americans would name Iron Bottom Sound, February 27, 1942. The Battle of the Java Sea should have been a Japanese triumph, and tactically it was. But Captain Hara, commanding destroyer Amatsukaze, witnessed something that disturbed him more than any enemy gunfire. The combined American, British, Dutch, Australian force under Rear Admiral Carroll Dorman fired 1,619 rounds of 8-inch shells during the battle, achieving only 5 hits, with 4 proving to be duds. The Japanese fired far less but scored critical hits. Yet Hara noticed something troubling in his after-action report. The Allied ships never stopped firing, never seemed concerned about ammunition expenditure, maintained rates of fire that would have exhausted Japanese magazines in the first hour. They fired as if they had unlimited shells, Hara wrote in his memoir published decades later. Poor gunnery, yes, but such wealth of ammunition that accuracy became secondary to volume. The Japanese victory was complete. 2 Allied cruisers and 3 destroyers sunk. But in the wardroom afterward, Hara overheard a disturbing conversation. Lieutenant Yoshida, his gunnery officer, was calculating ammunition expenditure. "Captain, we used 40% of our main battery ammunition, if the battle had continued another 2 hours." Hara silenced him with a look. But the arithmetic was clear. The Amatsukaze had started with 2,000 rounds of 5-inch ammunition. In one battle, they'd used 800. The destroyed Allied cruiser HMS Exeter, according to survivors they'd rescued, had fired over 1,500 rounds from her 8-inch guns alone, more than most Japanese heavy cruisers carried total. August 7th, 1942. When the Americans landed on Guadalcanal, the Imperial Navy's response revealed the ammunition crisis in stark terms. Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa's striking force, racing south from Rabaul, carried enough ammunition for exactly one night battle. Not as a tactical choice, but because that was all that existed in Rabaul's magazines. The Battle of Savo Island on August 9th seemed to vindicate Japanese tactics. In 33 minutes, Mikawa's force sank 4 Allied heavy cruisers, killing 1,077 sailors. The Japanese lost 0 ships, but hidden in this tactical masterpiece was strategic catastrophe. Commander Toshikazu Omai, Mikawa's operations officer, would later admit to American interrogators, "We withdrew immediately after the battle not from fear of air attack, as you believed, but because we had exhausted most of our ammunition. We had nothing left for a second engagement." The American transports, defenseless and loaded with supplies, were spared because the Japanese literally couldn't afford to shoot at them. Japanese forces had fired 471 rounds total, achieving 10 hits, a 2.1% hit rate that would later be criticized as wasteful by Tokyo. Meanwhile, at Pearl Harbor, Captain William Poco Smith was overseeing the loading of ammunition ship USS Rainier. Her cargo manifest for this single voyage, 5,000 tons of naval ammunition, including 350,000 rounds of 5-inch shells, 1.2 million rounds of 40mm, 3 million rounds of 20mm. This represented more ammunition than the entire Japanese combined fleet would expend in the next 3 months. The famous Tokyo Express runs, high-speed destroyer missions to resupply Guadalcanal, revealed the ammunition crisis in pathetic detail. On November 30th, 1942, Rear Admiral Raizo Tanaka led 8 destroyers on another supply mission. The cargo manifest, discovered in captured documents, told the story rice, 1,100 drums. Medical supplies, 200 drums. Ammunition, 280 drums. For 15,000 desperate soldiers, less than 300 drums of ammunition. Each drum contained roughly 300 rifle rounds or equivalent weight in other munitions. The entire Japanese garrison on Guadalcanal was surviving on ammunition deliveries that a single American destroyer could expend in 20 minutes of combat. Captain Hara, commanding Amatsukaze on these runs, wrote bitterly, "We risk 8 destroyers, dozens of lives, tons of fuel, to deliver what the Americans probably waste in target practice." He was more right than he knew. That same day, destroyer USS Fletcher conducted a routine gunnery exercise, expending 127 rounds of 5-inch ammunition, roughly equivalent to half a drum from Tanaka's precious cargo. The numbers were staggering, incomprehensible to Japanese planners who had calculated the war based on their own production capabilities. Naval Ammunition Depot, Hastings, Nebraska, came online in March 1943. Built on 48,000 acres of prairie with 2,200 buildings and 207 miles of railroad track, it employed 10,000 workers at peak production. This single facility produced 40% of the US Navy's ammunition during the war. In its first month of operation, Hastings produced more naval ammunition than all Japanese facilities combined would produce for the remainder of 1943. The facility specialized in 5-inch 38 caliber ammunition, the backbone of American naval firepower. Production rate, 100,000 rounds per month initially, climbing to 300,000 rounds per month by September 1943. Each round was inspected, tested, and shipped with a quality control process that rejected more ammunition than Japanese factories produced. Naval Ammunition Depot, McAllister, Oklahoma, opened simultaneously. Its focus, larger caliber shells and aerial bombs. Monthly production by December 1943. 50,000 16-inch shells, 120,000 8-inch shells, 200,000 5-inch shells, plus 500,000 pounds of aerial ordnance. Peak workforce, 8,600 in 1945. Meanwhile, in Japan, the Kure Naval Arsenal, the nation's premier ammunition facility, struggled to produce 10,000 shells of all calibers monthly. The Toyokawa Naval Arsenal, expanded at enormous cost in 1940, achieved peak production of 35,000 machine guns and 4.5 million rounds monthly, but only by employing 56,400 workers, including 6,000 conscripted schoolchildren aged 12 to 16 in dangerous conditions. June 19, 1944. The Battle of the Philippine Sea would provide the most dramatic demonstration of ammunition disparity in the entire war. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa had assembled 9 carriers with 473 aircraft for what Japan hoped would be the decisive battle. His opposite, Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanded 15 carriers with 956 aircraft. But more importantly, his task force carried something Ozawa couldn't imagine: virtually unlimited ammunition. Lieutenant Sadamu Takahashi, flying a Zero fighter from carrier Taiho, survived being shot down and later described his approach to the American fleet. The sky turned black with explosions. Not aimed shots, a solid wall of fire. They weren't trying to hit us specifically. They were filling every cubic meter of air with steel. The Americans fired with mechanical precision, every 5-inch gun maintaining 15 rounds per minute, every 40mm mount pumping out 120 rounds per minute, the 20mm cannons spraying 450 rounds per minute. The destroyer USS Stockham alone fired 12,000 rounds of 40mm and 20,000 rounds of 20mm ammunition in 6 hours of combat. Commander David McCampbell, the Navy's top ace, observed from his Hellcat fighter, "The Japs flew into a curtain of fire. Our ships weren't aiming at individual planes. They were creating zones of death that nothing could fly through." The mathematics were relentless. Japanese aircraft lost 476, including those lost when carriers sank. American aircraft lost 29. American ammunition expended 200,000 rounds of 5-inch, 500,000 rounds of 40mm, 1.2 million rounds of 20mm. Japanese pilots rescued 59. Quotes from rescued pilots: "It was not battle, it was execution by machinery." October 25, 1944, 0658 hours, off Samar Island, Philippines. The David versus Goliath battle that would epitomize the ammunition war was about to begin. Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force, 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 11 destroyers, had achieved complete tactical surprise against Taffy. 3. 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, 4 destroyer escorts. What happened next defied every expectation. Commander Ernest Evans, commanding destroyer USS Johnston, didn't hesitate. "All hands to general quarters. Prepare to attack major Japanese fleet units. All engines ahead flank. Left full rudder." In the next hour, Johnston would fire over 200 rounds from her 5 5-inch guns at heavy cruiser Kumano, scoring 40 hits that wrecked her superstructure. Johnston then engaged battleship Congo, firing 30 rounds while making smoke. Her gunners weren't aiming carefully. They were simply pouring fire at maximum rate. Meanwhile, on destroyer escort USS Samuel B. Roberts, Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland made a fateful decision. "We're going in, boys. This will be a fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected." What Copeland didn't say was that his ship carried only 325 rounds per gun, 1,625 rounds total. In the next 35 minutes, Roberts would fire over 600 rounds from just one gun mount, nearly 40% of her entire magazine, at rates that caused her gun barrels to glow white-hot. Gunner's Mate 3rd Class Paul H. Carr, gun captain of Mount 52, maintained firing even after the mount lost power. He and his crew manually loaded and fired 6 more rounds before a catastrophic explosion. Carr was found dying, still clutching the last 5-inch shell, trying to load it into the destroyed gun. On the Japanese side, battleship Yamato, the most powerful warship ever built, fired her main guns in anger for the first and only time against surface targets. While the exact number of rounds cannot be definitively confirmed, she fired dozens of her massive 18.1-inch shells. But her magazines contained armor-piercing shells designed for battleship combat. Against thin-skinned escort carriers, they passed through without exploding. Admiral Matome Ugaki, commanding Battleship Division 1, wrote in his diary that night, "The enemy destroyers charged through their own smoke, firing continuously. Such expenditure of ammunition for such small ships, it defies calculation." The battle statistics tell the story American ammunition expended, approximately 20,000 rounds of all calibers. Japanese ammunition expended, approximately 3,000 rounds of all calibers. American ships lost, 2 destroyers, 1 destroyer escort, 1 escort carrier. Japanese ships damaged by gunfire, 3 heavy cruisers severely damaged. Result? Japanese withdrawal despite overwhelming superiority. The production war's reality. By late 1944, American ammunition production had reached levels that defied Japanese comprehension. The true scale was staggering. The United States produced 47 billion rounds of small arms ammunition between 1941 and 1945, with 41.4 billion being rifle and pistol ammunition specifically. This was enough, as one general noted, for 10 shots at every person alive on Earth. Monthly production figures for November 1944. United States small arms ammunition, 3.5 billion rounds. 5-inch shells, 1.2 million. 40mm rounds, 8 million. 20mm rounds, 20 million. 16-inch shells, 10,000. 14-inch shells, 15,000. 8-inch shells, 40,000. 6-inch shells, 60,000. Japan, all ammunition combined, approximately 15 million rounds for the entire war. The Crane Naval Ammunition Depot in Indiana alone covered 63,000 acres and employed 10,000 workers. Its storage capacity, 2,000 individual magazines holding 400,000 tons of ammunition. To put this in perspective, the entire Imperial Japanese Navy's ammunition reserves in December 1941 totaled approximately 200,000 tons. The human dimension was equally telling. At Hastings, workers lived in specially built dormitories, ate in cafeterias serving 15,000 meals daily, and enjoyed recreational facilities including bowling alleys and movie theatres. Their children attended schools built specifically for the facility. It was a self-contained city dedicated to producing instruments of destruction. At Toyokawa Naval Arsenal, 12-year-old Akiko Sato worked 12-hour shifts filling shell casings. In her post-war memoir, she wrote, "We were always hungry. They gave us 1 rice ball for lunch. We worked until we collapsed. Many of my schoolmates died in accidents. We produced maybe 100 shells daily in our section. The Americans probably fired that many in 1 second." The ammunition shortage created a vicious cycle that accelerated Japanese defeat. Training suffered catastrophically when every round had to be hoarded for combat. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's leading surviving ace, revealed the impact. New pilots in 1944 received 40 to 60 hours flight training. In 1941, we had 700 hours minimum. But worse was gunnery training. New pilots fired maybe 100 rounds in practice. Americans fired thousands. The contrast was stark. At Naval Air Station Pensacola, American pilots fired an average of 5,000 rounds during advanced fighter training. Practice ammunition was unlimited. Trainees who showed poor marksmanship simply fired more until they improved. American pilots maintained 400 to 525 hours of flight training throughout the war. Ensign Kiyoshi Ito, trained in late 1944, described his preparation. "I fired my guns exactly 3 times before combat. 10 rounds each time, 30 rounds total. My first combat mission, the American I faced probably fired 30 rounds in the first second. For anti-aircraft gunners, the situation was worse. Japanese doctrine required holding fire until aircraft were within 800 meters, point-blank range for aircraft traveling 300 miles per hour. Why? Because at longer ranges, hit probability dropped below 0.5%, making ammunition expenditure wasteful. American gunners trained differently. Seaman First Class Robert Scott, a 20mm gunner on USS New Jersey, recalled, "We fired at everything, sleeves towed by planes, balloons, floating targets. I probably fired 50,000 rounds in training. The first time I saw a Japanese plane, muscle memory took over. I didn't think about ammunition. I just filled the sky with lead where he needed to fly." Task Force 38's logistics train represented a revolution in naval warfare that Japanese planners never anticipated. Service Squadron 10, the fleet's mobile supply force, included 34 fleet oilers, 11 escort carriers for replacement aircraft, 19 ammunition ships, 16 refrigerated stores ships, 8 hospital ships, 12 fleet tugs, 29 destroyer escorts for protection. On July 21st to 22nd, 1945, Task Group 30.8 conducted what was described as probably the largest single replenishment at sea operation in history, delivering 6,369 tons of ammunition, 379,157 barrels of fuel oil, 1,635 tons of provisions, 99 replacement aircraft, 421 personnel. This single replenishment delivered more ammunition than most Japanese naval bases held in total inventory. Commander Soemu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, admitted after the war, "We calculated American consumption based on our own limitations. If we could afford 1,000 rounds for an operation, we assumed they might have 3,000. The reality, they had 100,000, was beyond imagination." April 6, 1945. Operation 10 Go, the suicide sortie of battleship Yamato, provided the war's most poignant demonstration of ammunition disparity. Yamato sailed with 1,170 rounds for her 9 18.1-inch guns, 130 rounds per gun, essentially a full load. Additionally, she carried 1,629 rounds for her 6.1-inch guns and 13,500 anti-aircraft rounds. This represented every suitable shell available in Japan. Her secondary batteries carried 60% of normal ammunition load. Her anti-aircraft guns had enough for 12 minutes of sustained fire. Captain Kosaku Aruga addressed his crew. "We sail with enough ammunition for one battle. There will be no resupply. Use every round wisely." On April 7th, Yamato faced 386 American aircraft in waves. The first wave reported, "Target is throwing up tremendous AA fire." By the third wave, AA fire noticeably decreased. By the fifth wave, "Target A fire sporadic." Ensign Mitsuru Yoshida, one of Yamato's few survivors, described the final moments. The 25mm guns fell silent first, no ammunition. Then the 127mm guns. Finally, even the main battery had nothing left. We were a 70,000-ton target, nothing more. Meanwhile, the American carriers launching these strikes had been replenished just 72 hours earlier. USS Essex alone received 500 tons of ammunition. roughly 400,000 rounds of various calibers. Her air group would expend 200,000 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition attacking Yamato, knowing that tomorrow's replenishment would replace it all. The ammunition shortage created cascading effects throughout Japanese society. By 1944, copper shortage, critical for shell casings, led to collection drives that confiscated temple bells, some dating to the 8th century. Bronze statues, including national treasures, were melted down. Household items from pots to door handles were requisitioned. Japan melted 45,000 Buddhist temple bells for munitions between 1937 and 1945, representing 90% of all temple bells in the nation. Each bell, weighing hundreds of kilograms and composed of 85% copper and 12 to 15% tin, was especially valuable for shell casings. 13-year-old Yukiko Tanaka recorded in her diary, "They took our school bell today for ammunition." Teacher Yamamoto cried. He said the bell had rung for 200 years. How many shells will it make? How many seconds will those shells last in battle? The answer was heartbreaking. The typical temple bell, weighing 500 kilograms, yielded enough brass for approximately 2,000 small-caliber shell casings. An American destroyer's 40mm mount could fire that many rounds in 16 minutes of combat. Worker conditions at Japanese arsenals deteriorated catastrophically. At Toyokawa Naval Arsenal, accident rates reached 15% monthly by 1945. Exhausted child workers handled dangerous explosives with minimal training. On August 7, 1945, a B-29 raid destroyed the facility, killing 2,477 workers, mostly teenagers. Contrast this with American worker Mary Roberts, who assembled shells at Hastings. "We worked 8-hour shifts 5 days a week. Good pay, $1.20 an hour. Hot meals in the cafeteria. They showed movies every Friday. We knew we were winning the war, one shell at a time." American tactics evolved to exploit their ammunition advantage, while Japanese tactics increasingly reflected desperate conservation. Admiral Willis Ching Lee, the Navy's premier surface warfare tactician, developed the concept of area saturation for night battles. Rather than carefully aimed shots, American ships would fill entire zones with shells, making evasion impossible. At the Battle of Surigao Strait, October 25, 1944, Lee's doctrine reached its apex. Admiral Jesse Oldendorf's battle line fired 285 16-inch shells, 310 14-inch shells, and thousands of 8-inch and 6-inch rounds in just 18 minutes. The Japanese battleships Fuso and Yamashiro, sailing with reduced ammunition loads to conserve weight, managed to return less than 100 rounds total before being obliterated. Lieutenant Commander Tokuno Horishi, one of Yamashiro's few survivors, described the experience. "Shells fell like rain. Not aimed at us specifically, they simply filled the strait with explosions. We fired back into the darkness, but for every shell we sent, 50 came back." Japanese tactics, conversely, became increasingly desperate. The special attack, kamikaze units represented the logical endpoint of ammunition shortage. When conventional weapons become too precious to expend, the weapon becomes the human himself. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, creator of the Kamikaze Corps, admitted privately, "We resort to body crashing because we lack the ammunition for conventional attack. One pilot, one plane, replaces hundreds of shells we don't have." American codebreakers reading Japanese naval messages gained insights into the ammunition crisis that shaped strategic planning. A decoded message from December 1944 revealed, "Combined fleet ammunition status, 16-inch 15% of required minimum, 14-inch 22% of required minimum, 8-inch 18% of required minimum, 5-inch 31% of required minimum. Anti-aircraft, critical shortage all calibers." Admiral Chester Nimitz, reading this intelligence, remarked to his staff, "They're a boxer with no punch left. We just keep hitting until they fall. American planners began deliberately planning operations to force Japanese ammunition expenditure. Feint attacks, harassment raids, and probing actions were designed not necessarily to achieve tactical objectives, but to drain Japanese magazines. Commander Joseph Rochefort, the legendary cryptanalyst, noted, "We could predict Japanese operations by their ammunition requisitions. When they requested resupply, we knew they couldn't fight for at least 2 weeks. We owned the timing of every battle." American submarines devastated Japanese ammunition transport, creating critical shortages throughout the empire. The numbers were staggering. Japanese ammunition ships sunk 147. Tonnage of ammunition lost, approximately 500,000 tons. Percentage of ammunition shipments lost, 55%. Lieutenant Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton, commanding USS Wahoo, sank ammunition ship Fukuei Maru in January 1943. The explosion was visible 40 miles away. That single ship carried more ammunition than the entire Rabaul garrison would receive for the next 3 months. Japanese Captain Tatsuwaka Shimazaki, commanding an ammunition convoy, described the impossible situation. "We loaded at Kure with 10,000 tons of shells for Rabaul. 4 ships. By the time we arrived, 2 ships were sunk, 1 damaged. We delivered 2,000 tons. The submarines took the rest." The psychological impact on Japanese logistics officers was crushing. Commander Yoshiro Tanaka, responsible for ammunition distribution in the Philippines, committed suicide in October 1944 after failing to deliver critical supplies to Leyte. His final note, "I send empty ships to die. The Americans sink them full or empty. Our guns fall silent while theirs never stop." By war's end, the production statistics told the entire story. United States naval ammunition production, 1941 to 1945. Total rounds all types, 47 billion, 41.4 billion rifle pistol ammunition. Total weight, 4.2 million tons. Peak monthly production, March 1945, 3.5 billion rounds. Number of production facilities, 47. Peak employment, 486,000 workers. Japanese naval ammunition production, 1941 to 1945. Total rounds, all calibers, approximately 15 million, estimated. Total weight, approximately 200,000 tons. Peak monthly production, November 1942, 400,000 rounds. Number of production facilities, 11. Peak employment, 95,000 workers, including conscripted children. The disparity exceeded 3,100 to 1 in small arms ammunition quantity alone, but quality differences made the gap even larger. American proximity fuses, introduced in 1943, increased anti-aircraft lethality by 300 to 600%. Japanese fuses, degraded by material shortages, suffered a 30% failure rate by 1945. The ammunition disparity created a psychological transformation in both navies that shaped the Pacific War's final year. For American sailors, unlimited ammunition bred absolute confidence. Seaman James Bradley, serving on destroyer USS Laffey, recalled, "We never worried about running out. The supply ships came every few days, mountains of shells. We joked that we could shoot at seagulls for target practice and nobody would care." This confidence translated into aggressive tactics. American destroyers charged battleships. Destroyer escorts attacked heavy cruisers. PT boats engaged destroyers. The David versus Goliath encounters that defined the Pacific War's surface actions were possible because David had unlimited stones. For Japanese sailors, the transformation was inverse. Lieutenant Kazuhiko Ono, gunnery officer on destroyer Isokaze, described the mental burden. "Every shell fired required justification. We counted rounds like a miser counts coins. In battle, part of your mind always calculated, can I afford this shot? That hesitation was fatal. The most profound psychological impact came from witnessing American profligacy. Commander Tamichi Fukuda, captured after his destroyer sank at Leyte, was transferred to Pearl Harbor aboard USS New Jersey. He watched a gunnery exercise where the battleship fired 400 rounds in training. "I wept," he admitted later. "Not from shame of capture, but from understanding. We never had a chance. They fired more shells in practice than we carried into battle. How do you fight such wealth?" The ammunition war reflected deeper economic truths. America's gross national product in 1944 reached $210 billion, more than 10 times Japan's $20 billion. But raw figures understate the disparity in ammunition production capability. American ammunition production consumed: copper, 450,000 tons annually; lead, 380,000 tons annually; steel, 2.8 million tons annually; explosives, 3.2 million tons annually. Japan's entire national consumption of these materials, for all purposes, military and civilian, never exceeded: copper, 80,000 tons annually; lead, 25,000 tons annually; steel, 4 million tons annually, mostly for shipbuilding; explosives, 200,000 tons annually. The United States produced more copper for shell casings than Japan produced for all electrical, industrial, and military needs combined. American lead production for bullets exceeded Japanese total lead availability by a factor of 15. Beyond quantity lay qualitative superiority that multiplied American advantages. The proximity fuse, developed by Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, revolutionized anti-aircraft warfare. Instead of requiring direct hits, shells exploded when radar detected they were near aircraft. The development program cost $1 billion, 1940s dollars, 5% of Japan's entire 1944 GNP. This made it the third most expensive program of the war after the Manhattan Project, $2 billion, and B-29 development, $3 billion. Production required precision manufacturing beyond Japanese capabilities. Each fuse contained miniaturized vacuum tubes that could withstand 20,000 times gravity acceleration when fired. By war's end, America had produced 22 million proximity fuses. The proximity fuse first saw combat on January 5, 1943, when USS Helena shot down a Japanese dive bomber with her second salvo. The technology improved anti-aircraft effectiveness by 300 to 600%. Admiral Kiyoshi Hasegawa, observing proximity-fused shells in action during a 1945 raid, reported, "The American shells explode by magic, knowing when they approach our aircraft. Each explosion is perfectly placed. This is not warfare, it is witchcraft by mathematics." Fire control systems showed similar disparity. The Mark 37 gunfire control system, standard on American destroyers, incorporated gyroscopic stabilization, automatic radar tracking, mechanical ballistic computation, electric servo drives, remote power control. This system allowed accurate fire in any weather, day or night, at maneuvering targets. Cost per system, $500,000. More than the entire annual ammunition budget for a Japanese destroyer squadron. Japanese fire control remained largely manual, dependent on optical rangefinders useless in poor visibility. Captain Toshiro Miura admitted, "We aimed by eye while they aimed by machine. We guessed while they calculated. Every American shell was directed by mathematics we couldn't match." The ammunition disparity produced remarkable survival statistics that defied conventional military wisdom. American destroyer USS Lafay survived 22 kamikaze attacks on April 16, 1945, largely because her guns never fell silent. In 80 minutes, Lafay fired 345 rounds of 5-inch, 11,000 rounds of 40mm, 20,000 rounds of 20mm. Her gunners shot down 9 aircraft definitively, damaged 4 more that crashed elsewhere. Despite taking 4 bomb hits and 6 kamikaze strikes, Laffey survived because her defensive fire degraded most attacks before impact. Contrast destroyer Yahagi sunk escorting Yamato. Her anti-aircraft ammunition exhausted after 45 minutes, she could only maneuver helplessly as American aircraft attacked unopposed. 7 torpedo and 12 bomb hits later, she capsized. The cruiser USS Helena's ammunition expenditure deserves special attention. Throughout her career from December 1941 to July 1943, Helena fired a total of 10,639 rounds, 3,460 rounds of 5-inch and 7,179 rounds of 6-inch ammunition. This wasn't from a single battle, but cumulative across all her engagements, including Pearl Harbor, Guadalcanal naval battles, and Kula Gulf, where she was sunk. Helena earned the nickname Machine Gun Cruiser for her rapid-fire tactics. At the naval battle of Guadalcanal on November 13, 1942, she fired so rapidly that Japanese observers thought she was equipped with automatic 6-inch guns, which didn't exist. Her rate of fire exceeded what Japanese doctrine considered physically possible. Captain Hara's observation that Americans fired without thinking, while Japanese counted every round, captured more than tactical difference. It revealed the war's fundamental nature. This was not conflict between comparable powers temporarily advantaged or disadvantaged. This was industrial civilization crushing pre-industrial ambition. The final statistics are overwhelming. American ammunition expended, 47 billion rounds total, 41.4 billion rifle-pistol. Japanese ammunition expended, approximately 15 million rounds, all types estimated. Ratio, 3,100 to 1. But even these numbers understate reality. American forces expended ammunition in training, test firing, and harassment missions. Japanese forces hoarded rounds until the moment of destruction. Americans fired to suppress, to intimidate, to dominate. Japanese fired only when certain of effect. When Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, he spoke of a new and most cruel bomb. But privately, military leaders knew the atomic bomb merely abbreviated a defeat already certain. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, the Navy's final commander, admitted, "We could build ships without steel, we could fly planes without fuel, but we could not fight without ammunition." The Americans had infinite amounts. We had whatever we could salvage from our grandfathers' temples. In the ruins of Kure Naval Arsenal, workers found a final production report dated August 14, 1945. Daily production, 73 shells, various calibers. Worker strength, 423, including 200 middle school students. Status, critical shortage all materials. That same day, Hastings Naval Ammunition Depot reported daily production, 45,000 shells, various calibers. Worker strength, 5,800. Status, exceeding quota. Recommendation, reduce production due to anticipated war termination. The Pacific War's ammunition disparity teaches a lesson that transcends military history. Wars between industrial powers are not decided by courage, skill, or determination, though these matter, but by the capacity to transform raw materials into delivered destruction. Captain Hara survived to write his memoirs, unique among Japanese destroyer captains. His final assessment was stark. "We brought swords to a machine gun fight, then wondered why we lost. The Americans didn't defeat our Navy, their factories did. Every shell they fired announced industrial supremacy we couldn't imagine, much less match." The brass casings littering the Pacific's floor tell this story, each one stamped with American ordnance marks, each one representing industrial capacity that transformed warfare from art to arithmetic. The Americans could afford to fire without thinking, because thinking was unnecessary when supply was infinite. Japan counted every round because each one was precious, irreplaceable, a fragment of national treasure transformed into instrument of war. But wars are not won by counting. They are won by those who can afford not to count, who can fill the sky with steel and the sea with fire, who can transform industrial might into delivered destruction without hesitation or limit. Behind every statistic lay human tragedy. Ensign Takeo Matsui, commanding a 25mm mount on carrier Zuikaku, received 10 rounds for his weapon during the Battle of Cape Engano, the carrier's last fight. He held fire as American planes attacked repeatedly, waiting for the perfect shot that never came. Zuikaku sank with his unfired rounds. His mother received his final letter. "I have 10 chances to protect our ship. I will make each one count." She never learned he died without firing a shot, paralyzed by the terrible arithmetic of scarcity. Meanwhile, Seaman Robert Dixon, 20mm gunner on USS Essex, fired 15,000 rounds during the same battle. In a letter home, he wrote, "Mum, you wouldn't believe how many bullets we shoot. It's like a fireworks show that never ends. Don't worry about me. We've got so much ammunition, nothing can get through." Both young men served their nations with equal courage, but one counted rounds while the other counted victories. The difference was not character, but industrial capacity, not bravery but brass casings, not determination but the ability to transform national wealth into naval firepower. Today, 80 years after Japan's surrender, the ammunition disparities lessons resonate. Military professionals study Captain Hara's observation not as historical curiosity, but as eternal truth. Wars between industrial powers are decided in factories before they're fought in fields. The Pacific War proved that industrial capacity, once mobilized, generates military power that no amount of tactical brilliance can overcome. American shells fell like rain because American factories produced like storms. Japanese shells were precious because Japanese factories produced like artisans. In the end, Captain Hara's words stand as epitaph for an empire that challenged industrial mathematics with spiritual determination. The Americans used shells without thinking while we counted every round. In that difference lay not just tactical disadvantage, but strategic impossibility, not just military defeat, but civilizational reckoning with the arithmetic of modern war. The shells have long since stopped falling, the guns long since fallen silent. But in naval archives from Pearl Harbor to Yokosuka, in memoirs from Washington to Tokyo, the truth remains. The Pacific War was decided not by the courage of those who fired the shells, but by the capacity of those who made them. The Americans could afford to fire without thinking. The Japanese could only afford to think without firing. Between those two realities lay the abyss that swallowed an empire's ambitions and transformed the world's understanding of industrial warfare. The final testament comes not from admirals or historians, but from the numbers themselves, 47 billion to 15 million. In that ratio lies the Pacific War's true story, not of battles won or lost, but of an industrial colossus that could produce more ammunition than the world had ever seen, facing a nation that melted its temple bells to make a few more shells. The Americans fired without thinking because they could afford to. The Japanese counted every round because they had to. And in that difference, the war's outcome was written before the first shot was fired.